Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I rise to contribute to the Building Legislation Amendment Bill 2023. Of course, this is a very important piece of legislation which will action key improvements identified by the Building System Review Expert Panel and ensuring that Victorian consumers are protected and at the heart of our building system. And I will commend the member for Caulfield for his comments about making people accountable. And I'll come to some incidents out in my area in Melton shortly, but very similar to some of the facts that the member for Caulfield raised. And we do need to make builders, building surveyors, and even more so developers accountable for their actions or lack of actions in some of these situations that leave people either without a home or with a home with many faults that take many tens of thousands to repair. Or developers cancelling contracts. A couple of years later, I know that we got rid of the sunset clauses in legislation passed in this chamber, I think it was last year, but we're still seeing these actions by some developers cancelling contracts, unilaterally cancelling contracts, and people being left with nothing, no home. They've got their deposit on their land, and then the developers are trying to re-offer that block of land back to them at current market rates. And there's nothing that those poor individuals can do apart from take it to court, and of course they can't afford to take that legal action. So councils and ourselves, through legislation like this, need to keep builders, building surveyors and developers accountable. My electorate of Melton is one of the fastest growing electorates or areas of Melbourne. It's projected to go to 250,000 people by 2030. And 450,000 by 2050. So there's an enormous amount of building going on in that area, that LGA. This bill will primarily amend the Building Act 1993 and the Architects Act 1991, and it additionally amends the Sale of Land Act 1962, the Domestic Building Contracts Act 1995, the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal Act 1998, the Building and Construction Industry Security of Payment Act 2002, Owners Corporation Act 2006 and the Cladding Safety Victoria Act 2020. These legislative amendments will create the following reforms, and I'll read them out as they are recorded here. They'll formalise and strengthen the role of the State Building Surveyor. They will establish a building monitor. It expands the categories of building practitioner that will be required to be registered. It enhances the building approvals process by introducing further safeguards to better inform consumers. It also strengthens information sharing between statutory entities with a role in the building regulatory framework. It will amend the distribution of the cladding rectification levy, and it will also strengthen and improve the governance arrangements of the Architects Registration Board of Victoria under the Architects Act. Look, few things do anger me, but the irresponsibility of property developers, as I alluded to earlier, is a real major concern, and I would have at least up between 150 to 200 landowners that I think have been conned by developers in promising many things in their residential estate and not being delivered on by developers, and I think they need to be held accountable, and I've raised this with local council also. But there's many good, honest developers too, and many good, honest workers, in particular in the Melton areas, many fine builders and plumbers, electricians and architects. And it's typical, isn't it, that we have to change the law to cater for the minority when you have plenty of great builders and tradies that do great jobs, but of course, there's the small number of, I'll call them crooks, means that we have to bring in legislation and toughen legislation to try and protect the average punter out there. There's an estate called Robinson's Rise in Cobblebank in Melton, and again, I'll come back to what I said earlier, where people purchase land and house packages. Some of them quite some years ago, 4, 5, 6 years ago. And as I said, there was about 150 to 200 of these landowners. and this particular developer decided to unilaterally cancel the contracts. Now, unless the punter agrees and signs off on that, they can't cancel the contract. The problem is they're sitting idle with a block of land they effectively don't own, they can't build on, right? And the developer's telling them they've cancelled their contract. So of course, as I said before, the only way it can be rectified for these people is by taking it to court. They can't afford to take it to court. And myself, I've tried to get legal firms to take it up as a class action, but do you think we can get that done? So you've got about 150 to 200 people out there hoping that they were going to have a new home. Right? Some people moving into the area because they worked in emergency services and they wanted to be close to their workplace because they did shift work, 14-hour night shifts as an ambulance paramedic, and this particular paramedic wanted to be close, have a home close to where she worked so she didn't have to drive too far after 14-hour night shifts. Guess what? She hasn't got anything. She ends up, I think, doing a deal by just getting her deposit back. So she doesn't end up with the land. She doesn't end up with the land and house package. She gets intimidated and harassed to the point that she can't take legal action, and she ends up doing a deal to retrieve her money. It's a disgrace, an absolute disgrace, and it's life-changing for people, and it should not happen, and it shouldn't be allowed to happen. Notwithstanding that, we see situations where I've had people come to me where they've had houses built, and the faults in the house, I've been out and visited these places, and the faults in the houses, how they were allowed, how they were signed off, it astounds me. Stevie Wonder wouldn't have, could have seen the faults. It's just ridiculous. Cracks in walls, water, this water coming up through the slab, mould. It's just unbelievable. And I think it might have been the member for Caulfield about how much it was going to cost the person that had the apartment, $116,000. Well, this particular couple in my electorate, in excess of $200,000 in faults. All right? And then they ended up going to VCAT. A deal was done at VCAT. The builder offered to buy the house back, but then reneged only a few weeks out from these people moving into or purchasing another house. So then the battle went on again. And of course, it's cost him $50,000 to $60,000 in legal costs. Now, people shouldn't have to go through that. This was a retired couple. They were using all their retirement funds to justify trying to amend the problems with their house. They had to move out of the house. So those sorts of things just shouldn't happen, but they are happening, and I'm hoping this legislation will rectify those sort of things against developers and some of those shonky builders. And again, I know a lot of tradies, I know a lot of builders. They're not all bad. Again, I'll say it's a minority that makes it bad for the majority, and it's a shame that that happens. As I said before, the member for Ringwood referred to the power imbalance between the builders, the developers, the building surveyors, and the purchasers, and there is a power imbalance, and there's not a lot that they can do unless they do take legal action, and that's a shame that you have to go to that. The State Building Surveyor acts as an authoritative industry leader for building surveyors and practitioners across the state. This is an executive role in the Victorian Building Authority, which was recommended by the Victorian Cladding Task Force, and this bill will give further responsibility to the State Building Surveyor, giving them a statutory role as the primary source of expertise and technical guidance for the building and plumbing industries. And I hope that I have a bit of a bugbear with regulators. If our regulators regulated, we wouldn't have issues such as these. So I'm hopeful that this particular situation, the State Building Surveyor will regulate appropriately and keep the pressure on, as I said before, those shonky builders. So people will be delivered a good product. And as it's already been mentioned in here, this is the costliest asset that you'll have in your lifetime, and people have had their lives destroyed by shonky building, some builders harassing people for purchases, in particular single women that have purchased a house, and it's not good enough. This is a good bill, and I commend this bill to the House.